Blade Runner, Carbon Atlas, The Matrix. They all envision a dystopian urban future where high-tech genetic engineering intersects with the underbelly of a dark, collapsing society. This genre, called cyberpunk, is now spilling over into the real world. Biohackers, like their leather-clad heroes on screen, are right now in their garage labs or back alleys of Shanghai, mixing up experimental gene therapies and self-injecting, and selling them through the internet. The biohackers are online superstars to people with crippling genetic disease. Or bodybuilders looking for a cheap genetic leap. Want double muscle? Try a dose of myostatin knockout. They come for many reasons, but around the world, there are desperate people who are willing to pay for a miracle breakthrough. Genetic engineering is cheap and impossible to regulate. The biohacking culture has arrived.
Here's the thing about the FDA that I've learned is that their only job basically is to slow down pharmaceutical development. They don't give a shit about anything else. It's a marketing game. That reach that I have affects so many people. I didn't realize that until people started injecting themselves.
My name is Aaron Freywick.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm a pro.
Do you know in milliliters what you're putting in?
No, I'm afraid I don't.
Am I willing to go to jail to distribute knowledge?
I'm Cody Sheehy, your host. I'm also the director of the documentary Make People Better. This film tells the story of how a Chinese scientist secretly created the world's first genetically engineered babies.
And I'm your co-host, Samira Kiani, a medical doctor, genetic engineer, and co-producer of the film. You're listening to the Make People Better podcast, brought to you by the RandomGood Foundation, where we introduce you to the greatest minds and most interesting people at the cusp of a genetic engineering revolution that is transforming science fiction into science fact.
Most of the discussion around biohacking has so far either been framed around fear-mongering the risks or overhyping how far along the science actually is. This episode is going to take it a bit deeper. But first, a word from our sponsors.
The Make People Better podcast is brought to you by the RandomGood Foundation.
In this episode, we're going to tell the story of the biohacking movement through the eyes of one of its most famous members, Josiah Zayner. This biohacker first came to the attention of the public at a genetic engineering conference back in 2018. Joe got on stage and shocked a rather academic audience by challenging them that human genetic engineering was moving too slow, too cautiously. And then Joe pulled out a syringe and injected a CRISPR gene therapy. The injection would in theory knock out or inhibit a gene called myostatin. Pigs born with this condition naturally exhibit a freakish amount of muscle and have earned the nickname devil muscle pigs. Naturally, the stunt went viral. Joe embraced the controversy, along with the fame, and began selling the product online to bodybuilders. The FDA quickly stepped in and stopped it, and Joe's company, called the Odin, decided that the stunt had run its course, so they pivoted to selling harmless genetic engineering kits to high school science teachers. But the culture had been born, and soon, other pop-up companies were self-injecting on stage, selling dubious cures, and flaunting any attempt at regulation. And when it comes to regulation, governments have quickly come to grips with the fact that it is virtually impossible when the know-how, tools, and genetic materials are so easily obtained. This type of do-it-yourself science, outside the walls of stodgy universities and government labs, is the fastest growing part of the genetic engineering community. Combine this with the fact that the cost of doing genetic engineering is collapsing, and you have a situation that some people find exhilarating, and others find reckless. Samira, you've been involved in many of the discussions around biosecurity issues. What's the general vibe that academics have towards biohackers?
To be honest, many of my academic colleagues don't really take these communities seriously. There's some sort of knowledge and experience that comes with just being in an academic research lab to have the training. Individuals who start a genetic engineering lab in their garages do not have necessarily the knowledge that would allow you to do these sort of genetic engineering successfully. They call it tacit knowledge.
Do you think that just because some of the biohackers may not start with the tacit knowledge that they need, or that kind of deep, bench knowledge you need to actually mix everything together and get it right, even though they don't have it, it doesn't really stop them from selling something to people. And those people might inject that, and that may not be safe.
Right. A lot of hopeless patients might be willing to try anything.
It reminds me of some of the unregulated spaces that we've had in our history, where you have people, selling dubious cures, snake oil salesmen, so to speak. It kind of happens in the absence of regulation, that you don't know the quality of the products that you're buying.
Exactly. I agree with you.
Zayner's story is one that really evolves. And as Joe's story evolves, so did the biohacking community.
Yes, and I want to describe to you the Joe Zayner's interview scene, which was very interesting. Our first interview was at Joe's lab, which was in a house near the port of Oakland. A set of train tracks passed by overhead as we were doing the interview. Slightly cyberpunk, but really just mostly a residential setting. Inside, the lab was littered with shelves and desks full of genetic engineering equipment. 2 or 3 other employees who worked for Joe were there. At that time, Joe was fully outfitted as a biohacker, meaning leather jacket, skinny jeans, t-shirt, about 8 earrings in each ear, and a half-shaped steampunk hairdo.
So Joe wasn't quite the guy from Blade Runner who was selling genetically modified eyeballs on the street, but also not that far off. And Samira, this is a great opportunity to jump to a scene from Blade Runner, actually, just to set the stage.
Morphology, longevity, incept dates.
Don't know. I don't know such stuff. I just do eyes. Just eyes. Genetic design. Just eyes. You Nexus, huh? I design your eyes.
Joe, if only you could see what I've seen with your eyes.
Blade Runner is a fantastic movie, and I can't believe how prescient that film has been. But anyways, back to Joe. So we really wanted to know who Joe was underneath this outward appearance. And I think that at the heart of the fear-mongering around biohacking is really judgment of just who these people are. So are biohackers dangerous? I mean, are they bioterrorists from that movie 12 Monkeys? Or are they just the harmless kids from an episode of Big Bang Theory? We wanted to know who Joe Zayner was as a human being. And the best way to do that is to start way back at the beginning.
Let me hear you say thank you, Jesus. Let me hear you say I am blessed.
So I grew up in Valparaiso, Indiana, on an animal farm. We were pretty poor, drank dehydrated milk, and ate eggs from the chickens. I have 3 brothers, Zachariah, who's my older brother, Micah and Jedediah, who are my younger brothers. We're all named after people in the Christian Bible, all Old Testament prophets, I think.
And why did your parents name you all after prophets?
I think it was just that we grew up really religious, grew up Southern Baptist, shouting in the church and dancing. And Southern Baptist is a form of Christianity which believes that the stuff in the New Testament is not only true, but is still ongoing. So things like miracles, healings, things like speaking in tongues. Basically, it's you go to a church and sing songs and people dance and shout and laugh and they pray for people to get healed, and basically they're just trying to bring people to Jesus is the goal.
How big of a part of your life was that tradition, that story?
Oh, fuck, man. It's all we did. Like, my aunt and uncle, they run a church still in Illinois. My mom's first husband, who's my biological father, he ran a church. I was a missionary to Peru. Yeah, I thought I was gonna grow up and be a preacher. So it was pretty intense. Went to church, 2-3 times a week. I actually worked as a janitor at the church for a while. I remember they used to do this thing where they'd be like, all right, we believe that God still does miracles. And one of the most common miracles he does is he makes people's legs, it's hard to say this too seriously. He makes people's legs grow. So like a lot of people have legs that are different sizes, one shorter than the other. And so they'd get people, who'd go like this and their legs would be like slightly different sizes and they'd be like, Jesus, heal this person's leg. And then they'd move their leg and it'd be like about the same size. And they'd be like, look, this person was healed. And everyone would be like, ah. And you're like, wow, that's crazy and awesome. And now you think about it and you're like, wow, that was such a scam. Like, nobody like measured the leg size or anything, or somebody just kind of moved their leg. And like, I was thinking about that this morning. Yeah, it was just, it was a really weird, very theatrical, really strange environment. Yeah, lots of speaking in tongues, and I participated in all this stuff.
Do you remember the day that you left?
It's too much for like a child, right? So when I ran away, I actually went to Oklahoma. I did a lot of computer stuff back then. This was in like the late 90s, and I knew some guy from Oklahoma. I'd never seen his face before, didn't even know his real name, because we did like computer hacking shit online. But back then, you weren't worried about like weirdos on the internet.
So the internet really was your portal to the outside world.
Oh, totally, man. I would stay up all night, every night. Our house was tiny. It was like a 2-bedroom. All the kids were in one bedroom and my parents in the other. And the modems back then, they made loud noises. They were like, when they connected to the internet. So before I learned how to bust them open and disconnect the speakers, I would like cover them in all these sheets, like wake up at like midnight and cover them in all these sheets and blankets, so that the noises would be muffled out so I could connect to the internet and like go on the computer.
And then that led you to eventually go to college. You went to the University of Chicago to work on a PhD.
It's a great school, one of the best schools in the world, and I was just so honored to be able to go there that I was just like, wow, maybe I am kind of good at this thing. But still, it was funny because when we went to orientation for our biological sciences program, there was like, and they put up the statistics, where's everybody from? And they're like, there's one person from, the South, North Carolina. That was me. That's where I, was at school before. And I was like, holy shit, these schools are super classist, like people don't get the same advantages. So I immediately also felt out of place.
Yeah, I can imagine that. For a lot of people, that feeling is motivation to work even harder and prove them all wrong. Okay, so the next line on your resume is that you worked for NASA.
Yeah, it was my opportunity to try to explore things, and I thought like the creative freedom I would have at a place like NASA, where you're trying to like do stuff that's like so obscure creatively, like engineer organisms for space travel. I thought it'd be a great environment, but yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah, so like what I'm hearing is that you're really still feeling out of place. So at this point, you leave NASA and you kind of drop out of the professional science world, but you still love genetic engineering. What about it is so exciting to you?
So say, and this is just, easy and it's kind of cliche, but like say genetically engineered an organism to become like a dragon or something like that. A little dragon that you sell as a pet. You can imagine the demand for that thing would be outrageous, like out of control. Everybody would want one. And then you think about, well, like, how do you scale that? Do you have like a manufacturing plant like you do with a car, right? Or something, some like manufacturing plant where you're trying to produce like 1 million dragons a day, right? And then you start to think, whoa, that's kind of weird. Like that's like the industrialization of biology, of like an organism. When an organism becomes a commodity, right? Like a cell phone where everybody wants one. And to me, whether the Odin does that or somebody else does that, like, it's just so sci-fi and interesting. I think that would be the ultimate.
Do you think people would just totally think that gene engineering of everything is just normal at this point? Like in cyberpunk?
I mean, eventually you'd get to that place, but I think with any new technology or innovation or anything like that, there's always backlash before it becomes accepted. It's just, people are afraid to change. And yeah, people are just really afraid to change.
So after NASA, you were looking for a way to gene edit with more freedom, a little more creativity maybe. No, my role in the biohacking world, I think, has always been that of an enabler. It wasn't until around 2013, 14, 15 that people actually started to do stuff. I was one of those people who started to do stuff, do interesting biological experiments in my garage or home or whatever. And I never tried to be a leader. I still, don't try not to be a leader. So how is it that you got to be such an influential biohacker?
I think that's because I know how to tell stories. Yeah. No, honestly, you know what? Like, I think science is just as dogmatic as religion, right? Like, you go out and ask your best friend why they believe global warming or something is happening. And they'll say, well, because somebody told me so. And you're like, fuck, that's what people who say who go to church. Like, it's just because we say it's science, then it should be true instead of saying it's religion. And there's so many things in science that are this way.
So creating a narrative in the media is something you focus on just as much as doing the gene editing.
It's complicated, right? How do I make money, right? I make money by being a brand, by branding myself, by being able to sell stuff because people recognize my brand, recognize me. It's a marketing game. And the CRISPR experiment I did on myself, I didn't imagine what would happen happened, honestly. You don't realize how much power your words have until they have power. And I didn't realize the size of my reach, right? That reach that I have affects so many people. I didn't realize that until people started injecting themselves.
Samira, let's step back for a second and just catch everyone up. So things really came to a head with Aaron Trawick, who's another biohacker, and they started out with a supposed cure to herpes. Their science probably wasn't very good, but what they learned that was good was from Josiah Zayner, and that was how to create a media spectacle. So let's cut to their live on-stage product release.
My name is Aaron Trawick. I am the CEO of Ascendance Biomedical. We are a biomedical research and development firm specializing in breakthrough treatments in gene therapy technology.
You're freaking small, so don't like.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm a pro.
Yeah, I do.
The camera angle.
And what we're watching right now is Aaron actually dropping his pants. He has a big syringe, and in his crotch area, he's actually injecting himself with something. It is definitely a sensational moment.
Murine models.
I think it's all the way down, man. Stuff. Yeah, it just happened.
Yeah.
Wow, science, very exciting people.
It worked too. Aaron got a lot of media attention, but it's hard to hold that attention. So before long, Aaron needed a new stunt. The next cure was for HIV, and they found someone named Tristan Roberts and provided him with an experimental therapy that he would inject in live stream events on Facebook. So let's listen in on one of those.
Okay, so we are live.
I'm Tristan Roberts. I have had HIV for around 5 or 6 years. I have taken the traditional medicine route, and I have found it to be lacking.
Though our treatments and though our technologies are not currently on the open market, they are available as research compounds. These compounds are not for human consumption. They are for research purposes only.
So you should be a researcher if you're going to buy it.
Cool. So it's not very much that you're injecting. This is, do you know in milliliters what you're putting in?
No, I'm afraid I don't. First, I want to dedicate this to all the people who have died while not being able to access treatment, even though those treatments were available. All right.
How are you feeling?
Pretty jazzed. You know, I don't want to get my hopes up too high because, like, whenever you try something out for the first time, like, it's probably not going to work, right? Especially when it deals with, like, genetics.
So how was Joe Zayner connected to all of this, besides being an inspiration?
Okay, so the audience that Joe had grown by then was really bigger than anyone else's. And most of the activity was around marketing his kids. But commenting on Aaron's fake cures was a chance, I think, to really get that spotlight back for a bit. So let's just, but you know what we should do is jump over to Joe and hear it firsthand.
Usually I let things go because I don't think the community needs police. And so when people do crazy, weird stuff, I just let them do it, or I try to encourage them in ways in which they could do it safely. And so initially when people, including Aaron and his company Ascendance Biomedical, started injecting themselves with gene therapies and other things, I just tried to stay out of it. And then it started to escalate more and more, and they were trying to sell stuff to people. And I realized how much harm they could do to other people because they really had no idea what they were doing, like no idea. And the FDA really wasn't stepping in. Nobody was stepping in. So I thought that if I said something publicly about it, it would discourage people from encouraging them or participating with them. And it created a whole bunch of drama. Obviously, I'm sure it hurt them in many ways because somebody like me, who's one of the more well-known people in the community, coming out against them, I'm sure hurt their reputations a lot. And Aaron, who's the owner of this company and one of the people who injected themselves, he decided to file a lawsuit for libel against me for $250 million. And also Gizmodo Media Group, the news website. The court case was eventually dismissed for a lot of reasons. He filed it himself, so he didn't really understand all the legal things. But yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Unfortunately, Aaron's story took a dark turn after the lawsuit. The details around his death aren't entirely clear to the public, but what is known is that Aaron was found dead, drowned, floating in a sensory deprivation tank, not too much later. So speculation about foul play or that one of his gene therapy injections had gone wrong, that all turned out to just be rumor. It appears that his passing was just an unfortunate accident.
FDA was growing more and more concerned and had repeated communication with Joe about potential medical malpractice. So, Joe, what do you make of the FDA? Can they really regulate the biohacking community?
I mean, we always have had the FDA and other people breathing down our necks because we, as a company, the Odin, is always pushing the boundaries of stuff that has been available to people in their homes, right? So we're the first people to get genetic engineering kits on any sort of scale in people's homes. One of the kits we had was one that we sell. It allows people to engineer yeast, like brewing yeast. You could just buy some yeast from the store, and with our kit, you could genetically modify it. Obviously, the FDA was a little concerned because they're like, well, we don't want people genetically modifying yeast that hasn't been tested for safety and then like consuming it.
But can they stop biohackers? Are they stopping you?
Here's the thing about the FDA that I've learned is that their only job basically is to slow down pharmaceutical development. They don't give a shit about anything else. Really, like, especially what's been going on with biohackers, like injecting themselves with stuff, even providing other people material to inject themselves with, they haven't given a shit. They haven't done anything. Nothing. I'm going to do what I do whether people want to or not, right? People want me to, or what the laws and regulations are or anything like that, right? And I think the most important thing we have is this ability to give people a choice, having that choice, having that freedom.
But as this whole thing grows, society will probably need to regulate it, keep people safe. So if that happens, is this something you would keep doing even if you were breaking the law? Would you be willing to go to jail for it?
Am I willing to go to jail to distribute knowledge and tools for people to do science? How could society be against something like that? Like people distributing knowledge and information and science. And I don't know if it's something I'm willing to go to jail for. Doing genetic engineering, while I view it as fascinating and beautiful and wonderful and amazing, I don't know if I would go to jail for it. Maybe, depending, it caused me to move to another country or something like that.
Samira, this is where Joe's biohacking story starts to take on a new dimension. When biohackers, or even professional scientists often, reach the boundaries of what's legal in their home country, it usually doesn't take very long for them to figure out that other countries, the laws are different, and what they want to do might not be a problem.
In fact, there are 40 countries that have almost no medical regulation. There are many scientists who do part or all of an experiment abroad. For example, with the CRISPR babies, JK was looking into Thailand before he finally decided to set up his business on Hainan Island. And then there are like other US scientists who do part of their experimentation in China or Mexico. It's completely a practice that you see very pervasive in the industry.
I mean, we were all familiar with this with taxes, for example, companies jumping to different countries for different tax shelters. We're seeing it now in medicine.
Exactly.
Another dimension to Joe's story is that up until now, all the hacking had just been like bacteria. Then, of course, there were a few self-injections. But the idea of trying to cure people that are suffering from a genetic disease, that would be new.
Exactly. And something that even adds to the gravity of this is that Joe told us about all the emails that people were sending, begging for help. I think those people really had an effect on him.
At this point in the genomic revolution, all the marketing and all the money that's coming in, it's really still about improving healthcare and solving genetic disease. That's the part that has the most traction right now. And that was not lost on Joe, which is why Joe started to look at the Caribbean and to the Dominican Republic in particular. There's a doctor there named Ynti who'd been inviting Joe to come visit and get something going. So to make a long story short, we asked Joe if we could come along, and next thing we know, we're on a plane to the Dominican Republic.
We had no idea what to expect. We arrived at night. But what was your first impression of Ynti?
Well, I remember that he was a really energetic guy.
Welcome, brother. Hey, hey, my brother. Nice to meet you.
Here's one for you.
He met us at the airport, and he had bottles of rum and cigars.
Those are the best cigars here. And those cigars is two for you, two for you, two for you, and two for you.
And this is the best rum.
All right.
We're going to have a good time. We're going to have a good
Yeah.
time.
Definitely.
And I mean, to be honest, it was really welcoming. And I could also sense that he was like a little bit nervous. I think everyone at that point was just trying to figure out like what page everyone else was on and try to build trust with each other and just sort of that type of thing.
And then the next day, we got into a rental van and drove out of the tourist area and to the small rural town where Ynti has his clinic. You know, one of the very first things we found out is that a lot of folks like Ynti practice medicine without formal degrees and certifications. It's also possible to buy almost anything from the pharmacies. So things were really different than in the US.
And we were just trying to figure out what Ynti was actually doing in his clinic. And it became clear very quickly that he wasn't actually doing any gene therapies yet. He was mainly a plastic surgeon. And then also he did a lot of stem cell treatments. So gene therapies was something that he's like interested in and expanding into. But before we went to the clinic, we all sat down with Ynti and had lunch.
My friend, tell me, how things going?
Things are going good.
Tomorrow will be a great day for my patients because they finally gonna see.
People need help, and they have no way to get it. Not in the US, not in Europe, not in China. I think we have a very big opportunity here, and I think what we need to do is just figure out how to go forward, how to do something which can help a lot of people. And that's planning stuff, right? Understanding how much it's going to cost and all these things, because if we really want to make this happen, you know, create a business or something, we have to understand all these things. Yeah.
May I help my patients with dystrophy, muscular dystrophy?
Maybe.
If you get something that maybe work, they're gonna use it. They don't care about anything. I want to help them. I want to cure them. They're gonna die anyway. If you don't try, they will die.
Samira, at this point, were you a little nervous, I mean, as a medical professional, to be stepping into a situation like this, witnessing these guys set up an unregulated gene hacking clinic in the DR, the kind of thing where people might actually get hurt?
Oh my God, Cody, I completely remember all the nervousness that I had. I don't want to create a situation where someone gets compelled to do a dangerous treatment for a patient just because of being filmed and become, famous. You remember that conversation?
Ynti was operating on a script that the way you do this is a film crew shows up and somebody injects something, and that's how he needs to market himself as a biohacker. We had massive reservations about that because we didn't want to be part of the next media stunt. And Joe didn't want to be part of that either. And probably had some regrets and talked Ynti out of doing it. I feel like Joe kind of said, let's not do that.
I think Joe learned a lot of lesson from that, self-injecting stuff and the backlash. Joe didn't want Ynti to go through the same experience. And that's why there was a conversation, very deep conversation between Joe and Ynti.
I don't care.
But you don't need, I think you don't need to inject yourself. I think it makes people see you as just a crazy guy, and you're not a crazy guy.
It was an interesting situation where Joe was mentoring him to not saddle himself with that same reputation.
Exactly.
So the next day, we went to the clinic, and this clinic is on the outskirts of town.
Oh, man.
Here we do.
And I felt like it was very neat and tidy. And Ynti had a small gene editing lab set up in one of the rooms.
It's like this lab is really legit. It's really legit. It is.
And he'd arranged for Joe and our film crew to meet with a man who had muscular dystrophy. And this man, I had these wonderful friends that carried him, lifted him up and carried him into the clinic. And then I remember them positioning his legs. And it was apparent right away that his disease had progressed significantly and that he was nearly paralyzed.
Okay. If you could tell us your name and what happened before you came here.
Mi nombre es Henry Aneudi Donato Thompson.
He said the disease started just in one leg, his mother, and 4 uncles has the disease. His mother died at 42.
Wow.
That disease began when he was 20.
What were you expecting from coming here? Do you know the risks and things involved with it?
Yo esperaba mejorar bastante y...
He said he doesn't care about risk. Risk, he's living daily.
Even if it accelerates, even if instead of dying, 10 years from now, it causes unexpected death, 2 or 3 days.
Yes. Claro que sí.
You understand, no? He don't care. Anyone that has those kind of disease care about the risk. Risk, he said, is every day. He can die in whatever moment.
Everybody good?
Yeah. Great.
Gracias, Henry. Gracias. Gracias. Thank you so much.
We left the Dominican Republic feeling pretty moved by the experience. I think Joe was too. For me, it brought home the genomic revolution really has the power to help people. There are many genetic diseases and other diseases that might be completely eradicated. When you're around people with these conditions, those stories can't help but affect you.
Yes, these patient communities are very important, and it creates a responsibility for genetic scientists to develop this technology in responsible ways and accessible ways to help cure medical conditions.
There's a version of the future where the public backlash against all the other stuff, against designer babies or even against biohackers or the pursuit of immortality, actually end up slowing down the really important medical applications. So Samira, as far as we know, Joe is not developing the clinic with Ynti. I think Joe came back from that trip a bit changed. Everything I see on social media now is very measured. The days of self-injecting are truly over. He actually moved the business out of that residential house in Oakland and into a very legit industrial park in Austin. And it's expanded a lot. And I actually went there to do some filming after that move. And Samira, I gotta say, I was pretty impressed with the facility and the staff, and it really is maturing into a real business. What about the rest of the biohackers? Are they adulting as well?
We haven't heard more crazy stories coming from the biohacking community. So I believe the community is becoming more cautious
The other possibility is they're just not doing things for public attention anymore. Who knows what is going on that is not, being posted on live stream Facebook.
But you remember we also interviewed a number of biohackers or hackers who are paying scientists outside the US.
That is such a great reminder, Samira. We interviewed another biohacker, and it was a very sobering story for me, actually. The tacit knowledge problem was quickly encountered, and the solution that they came up with was, well, we may not have the chops to actually do the editing in the lab that we want to do. So we're going to go to a third world country that's on hard economic times and pay a scientist there who has that lab bench experience, that tacit knowledge. And they found a very wealthy individual to fund the whole thing. It's behind the scenes,
I know and I recognize after going through this journey that many times there are some noble intentions, but with it comes huge responsibilities. And I want everyone to understand that it's not just about creating these technologies more accessible or making the price go down, but it's also important to understand that these tools, technologies need to be safe to protect patients, to help them.
Joe Zayner has led a life of personal reinvention. For each transformation, there was an authority that had to be discarded. First, religion, then it was mainstream science, and eventually, even the culture of biohacking had to be left behind in the pursuit of, now it's business. This process made Joe wary of any type of authority. Joe isn't alone in these feelings. So in my opinion, the biohackers I've met, they all have been really good people. They're unique, yes, but good-hearted, creative. Like all young people with wild and ambitious ideas, they want to reinvent the world around them. They want to disrupt it. They're outside of the institutions of science and society in this case. And there are no older, wiser role models to show them the way. But as the power that they will grows, we can also assume or hope that new guardrails will also grow. In my opinion, I think the solution is actually that it's organically, it's like from within. Mm-hmm. That may be the only kind of guardrail that this particular community would ever respect, maybe. So like if you're at the skate park, the rules there are set by the kids, not the security guard. And that is where we have to leave this for now. But the story of the biohackers is really just getting started.
Join us for the next episode where we investigate a powerful new genetic tool called Gene Drive that will allow humans to redesign or eliminate entire species in nature by just releasing a few modified organisms. They contain a genetic change that will spread through the entire species. The scientists developing gene drives are already testing them in the wild. We meet with one of the inventors, Kevin Asfeld.
Please support this podcast by sharing it and leave us a review. We would also love to add your voice to this conversation. We'll be hosting a live discussion around this topic, and you're invited to join. Check the show notes for details. The Make People Better podcast is brought to you by the RandomGood Foundation. Thanks, and we'll talk with you again soon.